MKW World Champion Zombie Dragon here, coming to you all the way from Guangzhou, China. If you want to find out more about me and the Chinese pro wrestling scene, you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as Zombie Dragon. You can also follow Middle Kingdom Wrestling on YouTube to find matches. This is Wrestling with Regret.
Hello and welcome to Wednesday Warfare, where I review NXT and AEW Dynamite back-to-back and try and figure out which show won for the week. And folks, it's hard to, really think about winners and losers out there when times, and just this week alone, gets stranger and crazier and at times scarier by the hour, by the day. I hope you all are doing well in the wake of this whole COVID-19 thing. Obviously, it's changing the way a lot of us are living our lives. More things are closing, more businesses, more places, more restrictions every day. I know that on Monday I was naively optimistic is the best way I can describe it. My hopes for still holding out hope. There's a chance we can go to Tampa. No. What was I thinking? That whole thing blew up today when they announced that the beaches were closing in Tampa. That's probably the last desperate holdout we had of any hope of going to Tampa or making it work or making it any kind of effort to make it enjoyable. So Tampa's done. Chalk it up as a loss, and hey, we'll get them next year. The whole social distancing thing for me, I don't feel that different right now because I already work from home. And I don't have any coworkers here with me. And then when I'm off the clock, all my free time is usually dedicated to, being a parent and hanging out with my wife. So social distancing, I already got that in spades. It just feels different now because the kids are home from school now, and it's the weekend every day. My wife and I are able to split our work time. She's able to work from home, and I, do my thing in the afternoons. We trade off and stuff. And one looks after the kids, the other one does work. So we are able to make that happen, but it does just feel kind of like an extended weekend where you're focused more on the kids because there's no childcare and everything, so you're with the kids all the time. But now there's nowhere to go, there's nothing to do to spend. If you don't want to be holed up and cooped up in the house, you got to go somewhere else usually. Can't do that right now. So everyone, I'm sure, in that situation has to get creative. And the cherry on top in terms of the wrestling news today and how everything's been affected is that apparently WrestleMania is going to be a 2-night event now, taking place on Saturday and Sunday, the 4th and the 5th. And I guess with all these other shows being canceled, you can have the whole market now. And it's going to be hosted by Rob Gronkowski. Oh, the gods are smiling down upon me today. It's funny because for the last several years, a lot of fans, some at least, have been advocating for a 2-day WrestleMania because the weekend had gotten so huge and the show itself had gotten so big. So break it up into 2 days like Wrestle Kingdom. So now we're finally getting that, a 2-day WrestleMania, but now there's no one to watch it, no one to be there live for it. Oh, the great irony. So yeah, and I've also been hearing rumors that not only is it going to be a 2-night thing, but also it's going to be in different venues besides Performance Center. There's going to be some there, but others at other places as well. Yeah, needless to say, WrestleMania is going to be very weird, but there is still Wednesday programming as of this week. We'll see what happens though. Like what you like, don't be a dick, and let's just get through it. This week's NXT comes to us from the holodeck as Tom Phillips and Triple H host the action. I say action, but this episode is essentially a clip show. It's a recap show where there's 3 basic tenets on this episode that spans the entire length, and it's all about recapping the Gargano-Ciampa rivalry, Finn Balor, his story arc since being signed to the company, as well as Rhea Ripley's and her feud going into Mania with Charlotte. And so the Gargano-Ciampa part is over almost an hour 10 worth of programming if you add all the commercials and stuff. It's a lot of material, and they just walk you through every single beat of their story, from their tryout at the Performance Center 5 years ago, to the Cruiserweight Classic, to DIY, and their tag title reign there, their breakup, their rivalry, their brief mini reunion at Worlds Collide, and then take over Portland with the betrayal by Gargano, and wrapping it all up with a big Performance Center brawl last week. And basically, Ciampa sums it up in the package by saying, it's not about championships anymore, it's about who is the face of NXT. This, like I said, this takes up well over an hour of this 2-hour show. It is very in-depth. And if you are a super fan of this rivalry, or if you've missed any of their feud and their story in the last several years, then this will catch you right up. But as is the case with a lot of this episode, if you are a regular watcher of NXT and you pretty much know all that's going on, you can skip it. Like the stuff with Ciampa and Gargano, the Finn Balor segment of this show does a pretty good job kind of giving you all the main points of Finn's story arc from being signed to NXT several years ago as Prince Devitt and his dominance at NXT, being the champion there, going to the main roster on Raw and having a real big early surge of momentum there, winning the Universal Championship, then getting hurt right during that matchup, his comeback, and then how he's kind of like floundered in the main roster for a long time, finally coming back to NXT and getting that same kind of fire he felt in 2014. And oh yeah, by the way, he will face Walter at some point at TakeOver whenever that's happening. And so yeah, again, this is a great introduction to Finn Balor, or a great recap of what he's been doing, and that's pretty much it. Doesn't really offer a whole lot more. And then finally the show ends with the Rhea Ripley segment. Very similar kind of framework as the last two things. Shows the humble beginnings, Mae Young Classic, her reinvention, NXT UK, winning the championship from Shayna Baszler, and now she's fighting Charlotte. The one thing, I think this is probably the best one of them all out of the three segments, because this one actually kind of addresses WrestleMania and the crazy situation. She says in this package, Rhea does, she says, you know, when you woo Charlotte, the people woo back, but at WrestleMania, you won't have those people to woo for you because they won't be there. And the venue may have changed, but the outcome will not. Kind of nice little wrinkle there. So yeah, that was literally NXT. It was 3 lengthy exposition packages catching you up on things. So if you're up to date on everything, then this episode was kind of a nothing burger, essentially. It just tells you everything you already knew. I will say, I will give NXT credit for breaking up the monotony of the last couple of shows. SmackDown and Raw, empty performance center. It's really novel at first, but they got to try and take a break somehow to just kind of keep that momentum going for those future shows. So I don't blame them for doing a recap show in this vein, like filming in the holodeck in Stamford, instead of doing the performance center. They were able to do everything in-house, and it worked on that level. But as a show that really advances anything, this one didn't really happen. AEW begins on a much different note than NXT this week. It opens up on Cody standing in the ring, solo spotlight on him, and he's in a dark, empty Daly's place in Jacksonville. He has a very eloquent soliloquy here. He says, we must listen to science, but we must not live in fear, and he feels alive. And so he gives a big pep talk to his fellow elite members going into Blood and Guts. And so they bring Kenny Omega and Matt Jackson out as well. And this whole thing just feels like it's, you know, I was saying in the Raw review, we're so close to it being like just a straight up stage play now with like the way they're blocking and the way they have to do these promos. This literally felt like the opening scene in some kind of theater production. I know there's the phrase Kenny Olivier, but that's kind of the vibe I got from this was just like, and now look at us. So this very expository, very like pronounced delivery by Omega there. And then Hangman Page comes onto the stage, drink in hand, and then Matt asks, will you stand with us tonight? And at Blood and Guts, he just like nods and walks off and stuff. And then they wrap it up, and Kenny addresses the crowd again, saying, you know, let's have some positivity, let's have some pyro. And that was it. That was how it began, with this very elaborate, at times it felt almost a bit over dramatic, but still like in a fun, different, positive way in terms of the emotion and the expression with everyone there. It just felt natural compared to like other promos we've seen in the empty arenas in the last week or so. This one felt like, I don't know, it felt like the most emotional weight. And yeah, very different way of opening the show. You still have pyro in this empty house, and you know, it is theater, light cues, speeches, a character walks on stage and leaves again. It's interesting to see how the elite are furthering their story in this crowdless spectacle in this very dramatic way. Poor Tony Schiavone at ringside interviewing MJF, he's one of the many other wrestlers who are in attendance watching in the front couple of rows as the show's going on. So they do have that one advantage over NXT, where it was like, or I should say Raw and SmackDown, where straight up empty crowd, no one in the audience and everything. But here you have the wrestlers kind of like supporting each other in this kind of cool way, because every wrestler coming up's got that story of wrestling a show in a very, very empty or no tickets sold at all kind of venue where there's no one there, so you're basically just the boys of the crowd. Like, that is a very very relatable story in the world of indie wrestling. So that resonated with me to see that kind of happen there. It tugs at the heartstrings. Although I have to ask, define essential personnel for these sort of things, because if those guys, I mean, maybe some of them are working AEW Dark, but it's weird, the whole gathering thing of more than 10 or so people. That one kind of had me on edge for this one. But anyway, in this segment with Shivani and MJF says the money's not good enough for him to wrestle tonight, so he's going to hang out with Shawn Spears, and they're gambling, and Tony Schiavone calls him out on that, and they yell at him, and then it's like, do you want into this action? And then after he tosses back to the announce team, Tony's like, oh, how much you got on that? It's so fun. I love Tony Schiavone in AEW. He is like one of my favorite joys to watch about AEW Dynamite every week. So we go to our next match as the Best Friends take on the Lucha Brothers, Brandy Rhodes, to show you just how different AEW feels now with this bare bones set. There's no Justin Roberts. Brandy Rhodes is the ring announcer here, kind of tapping back into her FCW NXT days. And I love the lower third saying she would never ring announce again, and here we are. Orange Cassidy joins the commentary team for this one, but he says nothing. At times, he almost falls asleep as the match goes on. The action of the match is great, and so is the action between MJF and Shawn Spears in the front row. They're like gambling, and they're drinking wine as the match is going on. It's great. At one point, there was a pretty big noticeable botch where it looks like Trent's going for like a tiger feint kick onto Phoenix, who's distracted by Cassidy up from afar, but he gets caught in the rope, so he has to kind of like do this weird audible. We get an orange dive on the outside, but we get the Lucha Brothers ultimately winning the day after some nefarious actions. Then afterwards, Chucky T and Trent challenge the Lucha Brothers to a parking lot brawl, and they're very careful in how they word it. They don't say next week on Dynamite, like throughout the entire thing. Even Kenny Omega says in the opening speech, we don't know if there's going to be Dynamite next week. So as far as like when they're going to have their next show, everything's being postponed. So they say on the next Dynamite, whenever that is, we're going to have a parking lot brawl. I mean, no matter when it's happening, I'm looking forward to seeing that match. Women's four-way match up next. Penelope Ford, Riho, Hikaru Shida, and Chris Statlander in action. One point in this match early on, there is a dive by Riho to the other three ladies on the outside, and Jim Ross clearly giving no fucks on commentary, which seems to be the theme of the evening across him, Excalibur, and Taz. JR just goes, wow, those three ladies were right where they needed to be. Like, wow, just why don't you pull the curtain back a little bit more, JR. This was fast, entertaining work by all the ladies involved. I forget just how good Penelope Ford is in the ring. I've seen her in the highlights every once in a while, but man, I don't watch Dark, but man, when I see her in action here, she can really go. Kip Sabian is involved a couple of times, but he gets knocked around for his efforts. Ultimately, Shida wins after a big running knee strike to Ford, and so that was, fun action there. And then afterward, we see Colt Cabana being interviewed at ringside by Shivani afterward, and he's on the house mic talking mad shit about Kip Sabian getting involved. And of course, he's right there and hears everything. So Sabian wants to confront him, shoves him, but Colt's having none of it. He pushes him right back, stands his ground, and Sabian walks off. And Colt's very nonchalant about everything. So maybe some trouble brewing between those two guys. Will we see a feud develop between them? Time will tell, but it's great seeing Colt. John Moxley's interviewed earlier in the day outside the arena. He's still not medically cleared to compete, so he's like, I can do what I want. I'm out of here. But one more warning that when Blood and Guts eventually happens, Inner Circle, I'll be involved somehow. So that was John Moxley's input for the evening. We then go to our next match as the Butcher and the Blade take on the Jurassic Express. MJF handing Butcher and Blade a little bit of extra cash for their efforts on the night. Another really good match, and I will say, whether it's WWE or AEW or it's SmackDown or Raw or Dynamite, I have to give all the credit in the world to the men and women involved who are still performing at these high levels as if there were a huge raucous crowd, but in front of nobody. And it's easy, I would imagine, for some wrestlers to kind of take the foot off the gas when there's that kind of environment, but the lights are on bright and everything, and they're still able to work at that level and really show no missed steps in that. So I was very impressed by all the wrestling this past week in these empty arenas. Scary little botch near the end, though. At one point, the Butcher and the Blade are trying to toss Jungle Boy out of the ring, and somehow they get caught up in the ropes, and Blade is basically saving Jungle Boy's life. The match ends when the Jurassic Express, Luchasaurus, and Jungle Boy hit their double team finisher to win the matchup, and there you go. Well, after weeks of hype, the Exalted One is finally supposed to be showing up tonight on AEW. It's crazy how a couple of months ago, a lot of people, myself included, were writing off the Dark Order as one of the worst parts of AEW, and now all this intrigue and hype surrounding the Exalted One and everything suddenly made them one of the most talked about things about the entire show. So it's kind of cool to see that turnaround there. Evil Uno in the ring, talking about how the Exalted One's coming, and then all of of a sudden, Daniels and Kazarian, who are at ringside, have finally had enough. They interrupt the Dark Order, and they say they're tired of all the lies. Suddenly, the Exalted One appears on screen, and it's Brody Lee. The former Luke Harper is finally here after much speculation, is there in AEW. He looks so many years younger with his beard dyed fully black. He says Daniels isn't the first out-of-touch old man to doubt him, but he will be the last. The lights come back up, and then we see Brody in the ring with the rest of the Dark Order. They beat up SCU, and they stand tall. Brody Lee was definitely on a lot of people's short list as to who the Exalted One was going to be. It's one of those things where, yeah, it's easy to kind of predict, but predictable can also be fun, and that's kind of what I felt about this one. So now we finally know who the Exalted One is. So what is that going to mean for the future of the Dark Order? What is the ceiling of the Dark Order now? Like I said, people did not want to give the Dark Order the time of day at the beginning of AEW, and now with all this hype and this mystery surrounding the Exalted One, I think a lot of the interest is peaked for them. So how are they going to keep this momentum going? Do you like that Brody Lee is the Exalted One? Do you think that really improves your standing, or the Dark Order's standing to you as a fan? Let me know in the comments section. Back at ringside, Shivani interviews Lance Archer, or he tries to anyway, but Jake Roberts basically talks for him. A very chilling and eloquent promo by Jacob the Snake up here, talking about how he's offended. It's like a slap in the face that Cody has not responded and has ignored the gauntlet thrown down by Roberts a couple weeks ago. And he says that they will make Cody pay attention. So yeah, very chilling words. And then we go right into this pre-taped vignette for Archer in what they're calling the Murder Hawk Mansion. It's like this ring in the backyard of this big like ranch spot here. And Archer basically gets in the ring and beats up all of the yokels surrounding the ring to challenge him. It appears that Cheatham, the One-Eyed Midget from the old WCW mini-movie days, may have been the one presiding over the event, but I have not gotten official confirmation on that. But yeah, that was pretty much the whole thing, and Roberts is watching in the background as Archer beats people up. Everybody dies, everybody dies. So in kind of a 1-2 punch, they get over the whole Lance Archer-Jake Roberts partnership with that interview and the promo. Main event time, 6-man tag team match here as Santana, Ortiz, and Jake Hager take on Cody, Matt Jackson, and Hangman Page. The winning team gets the advantage in the Blood and Guts match taking place at some point in the future. Jericho, Le Champion, shows up before the match begins, and Guevara on the microphone sings along to Judas on the house mic. And so Jericho joins commentary and is just a delight. At one point he calls Arn Anderson's little playbook his Waffle House menu. Good main event. Matt and Hangman look to finally be on the same page near the very end. Their attempt at the Indie Taker goes awry, and ultimately Santana rolls up Matt to win the match for the Inner Circle. So they have the advantage of Blood and Guts, and they're already up a man because Nick Jackson was ridden out of action from the big garage door attack last week. So Jericho with his big post-match celebratory speech, kind of breaking everything down. This definitely felt like he was filling for time. Like, okay, we're light. Can you just keep talking trash? Do this. I was just, the WrestleMania 27 review just came out earlier today, and I'm, talking about The Rock filling for time right away. Jericho doing much the same thing tonight. So he's just filling for time, keeps going and going. Finally, we hear this buzzing sound, and it's Vanguard 1. Ooh, we all know where this is going. Finally, they reveal, oh, there's a fifth man after all. Up in the stands, lurking in the shadows, it's Broken Matt Hardy. He's got a red streak now, and Jericho looks to be in shock. And God, can you imagine the reaction this would have gotten if there was actually people at this show? But nevertheless, really cool. Again, it's one of those things where I think everyone and their mother predicted that Matt Hardy was going to be involved in AEW in some way, especially after Free the Delete and whatnot, and the Jacksons getting involved. So that was basically how we come to that conclusion. We find out he is going to be the fifth man. Him debuting in this fashion, I think, is a really cool way to bring him on and have his debut make some kind of sense. Again, whenever Blood and Guts happens, I'm there for it. I'm ready, and curious to see how that match plays out. Now, I do want to walk back something I said a few weeks ago. When Matt Hardy got beat up by Randy Orton the second week in a row, I said that, if it so happens that at Revolution, if Matt Hardy were to debut as the Exalted One or something, I would have been a little miffed at that. Like, yeah, it's not AEW's obligation to keep the continuity of an angle going from WWE, but it's like if Matt really gets his shit wrecked and like he's like his neck is broken or something, it would be ridiculous and it would just make the whole concept of wrestling seem like a total work if Matt were just completely no-sell it. But there's a few different things that made me change my mind about that, because enough time's passed since Revolution, and you've seen how Matt recovers from his neck injury in Free the Delete. And also, I would have to say the coronavirus changing everything has really given everyone a pass, at least for this week. So we can kind of, we can retcon that stuff with Matt Hardy and Orton. So him coming back in this way, I think, was very dramatic, and it works. And so, yeah, really excited to see what they do, and if Broken Matt Hardy will be able to do what he couldn't really do in WWE and really use that character to the same kind of potential and same kind of level that they had at Impact before. Time now for me to decide which show won for the week, NXT or AEW Dynamite. Now, I will say that before I started watching tonight, I was going to go into this week saying, you know what, I'm going to give both shows a pass because coronavirus and everything's crazy now. But you know what? No, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do AEW dirty. They won for the week because they at least put in the effort. NXT, like I said, it was a different format than what we've seen in the last week for SmackDown and Raw, but at the end of the day, it was still just a recap show. It was still just hype packages and exposition, and that was it. So if you're a regular viewer of NXT, you gained practically nothing from watching this show. Meanwhile, with AEW, they did their damnedest to do like an empty arena show, and it just felt like a different vibe than what we'd seen in the Performance Center. And I think the size of the venue might have something to do with it. Also, the fact a couple of the smattering of talent on the outside cheering on might have just added just a little bit of a spark. But I don't know, I just felt that watching the wrestling in this empty arena match, the empty arena show, I should say, it just felt different and felt more alive and exciting than the matches we saw in the Performance Center, as few as they were. And of course, the biggest difference is, like I said, NXT was a recap episode, and this week, stuff went down, like angles and storylines and characters were progressed. We saw some big debuts in Brody Lee and Matt Hardy wherever they go. But man, this was a show where stuff actually happened, and it was also kind of engaging because of the environment and the crazy circumstances that they're in now. It is a damn shame that a show like what we saw on Dynamite this week was not in front of a live audience, because I think they would have received it very, very well. Would have been really cool to hear those reactions. And yeah, as far as like, is Dynamite going to happen next week? Who really knows? Like, that's gonna, the next few weeks for all the programming, especially Wednesday Warfare, could be very interesting, because if Dynamite's not happening, this will just be an NXT review week by week, and until we go back to the normal programming. So a lot of stuff's up in the air right now. But if this is the way that Dynamite is going to go take a break for a while, then what a hell of a way for them to do it. But let me know what you thought about NXT and AEW this week in the comments section below, and vote which show you thought was better by going to the iCard in the corner of your screen. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.